Yeah, we'll go live. We'll talk about it.
Okay. And I'll just do a quick intro and then kick you guys off.
Okay.
Rise and shine, my sinners. When Father Evil starts his day, he gets a little deadly. Deadly Grounds coffee has the richest, smoothest flavor you'll find anywhere. It's sinfully delicious. Once you go deadly, you never go back. Order yours at getdeadly.com. Coffee's so good, it's scary.
And we are live. I want to thank everybody for joining today. We have a very special episode, actually a bunch of episodes tonight. It's going to be a fun one. But Chris has an awesome guest joining him for the Clone Saga Chronicles. Actually, that's Zach's show on the Spectacular Spider-Man Sal Bucema era podcast. Chris, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. You have an awesome guest with you.
Yes, we have Zach. Zach from the Clone Saga Chronicles. He came on Radio Horror a couple of years ago in a lost episode, which did broadcast, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to find until just recently when the station computer, which had a lot of old episodes of Radio Horror, got lost. But he was able to take out like the hard drive, and we finally found Zach's actually old episode. But Zach came on to talk about horrors of Spider-Man, which there are quite a lot of them.
One of which we might be covering tonight.
If you know anything about Spider-Man's body horror history.
Yes. No, it's so good. Chris and I, like I said back in the day when I did that on his show, I was really like sad that it got lost to the ether. I had a lot of fun. So
right. But it did broadcast. We just couldn't find it until just recently. So it will get cleaned up and edited for anything that's like out of context and old and finally stuck online somewhere.
Sweet. Yes. I am so excited.
Like I said, it's been a couple weeks since we've done the show. We last left off with the Inferno storyline, but prior to that, in small cameo appearances, the Gwen Stacy clone had returned. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do if I can't get Jerry Conway on, who's responsible for all these Clone Saga shenanigans, that son of a bitch, I'll get the next best person. I'll get Zach.
Oh man! Oh God! How do I like explain to the those that don't know how I became a Clone Saga apologist? But
you like punishment for some reason? I mean,
okay. To be fair, my very first comic was Spectacular Spider-Man number 223, drawn by Sal Bucema. Unfortunately, it was inked by Bill Sienkiewicz, and when you get there, I am so sorry.
We're not. This show will end with the Clone Saga beginning, and then I'll just be like, so you want to know what happens next? Zach's got an entire podcast of years worth of shows. I swear to God, I said we are going to end this show with the Clone Saga beginning. So it basically with Peter and Ben being like, you, and then that's it. No more Spectacular Spider-Man podcast.
Listen, I understand. Trust me, I understand.
Do you know what this podcast will become? I threatened Leo with this.
What's that?
We're going to become a super sexy comic book podcast covering Terror Witch of the Black Rose.
Listen, I know a guy that actually did a podcast like in 2009 era.
That show got never that show. I listened to that podcast too, and that show unfortunately just stopped. You know what I mean? There was a Terror Witch of the Black Rose podcast, and it just ended. It even asked Jim and Holly about it because they've been on Radio Horror a couple times. They're like,
right.
We didn't know there was a podcast about Terror, and they listened to it, and they're like, that wasn't that good.
By the way, Lottie, hi Lottie from the UK. We've been getting a lot of people from the UK lately. It's been great.
What time is it in the UK right now? Oh, it's gonna be like after midnight.
It's it was 12:42 because it's 6 hours ahead of me.
Right, definitely. Well, why don't we jump right into it? Because there's a Star Wars themed show coming on after this. Zach, will you have the plot synopsis for the Spectacular Spider-Man High Evolution? Sorry, I keep calling it the High Evolutionary War. It's the Evolutionary War. Yes. Spider-Man Annual number 8, not to be confused with the Alf Annual. You remember Alf had an annual crossover with the Evolutionary War?
Yes. And it was put in the Marvel Universe handbook that it was in canon. That particular issue was in canon. So
yes, I mentioned it because Leo has Alf sitting right behind him to his left.
Yeah,
right.
That's original from what was it, like the 80s? Was Alf
yeah,
the 80s?
You know, those aren't really hard to find. If you're lucky, you can easily find one of those on eBay pretty cheap.
Yeah, I saw it at a con and had to pick it up. I also have the Burger King little puppets.
Yes. You can watch all of Alf Everyone on Tubi right now for free.
Nice. And I have to acknowledge, yes, I happen to be here on May the 4th. So,
yes.
I'm like, oh yeah.
What is Star Wars and Marvel have in common now? Again?
Yes. Ron Friends used to draw the Artist of Amazing Spider-Man during the Black Costume Saga. Used to draw the Star Wars book.
All right, let's get into the annual.
All right, so I'm going to really briefly do just a bullet point thing about the annual and what this means. Briefly going through the Clone Saga. So Miles Warren's first appearance was Amazing Spider-Man number 31 as a professor at ESU. His first appearance as the Jackal was in, but we didn't know this yet, was in Amazing Spider-Man number 129, which is notable because that is the Punisher's first appearance.
Right, the Jackal hired the Punisher to kill Spider-Man because he wanted to bang Gwen Stacy and he couldn't.
Exactly. We'll get to that in a minute. Spoilers. Jackal's return he wouldn't return until the final splash page of Amazing Spider-Man number 139. During this whole first few issues, Peter thinks he's losing it because he's fighting Mysterio, which was the second Mysterio, because the first Mysterio was presumed dead for the first time. Peter ends up going to Paris for an adventure, returns home to find Gwen in the apartment. And now during the adventure with the before that, Aunt May saw Gwen and had a stroke, basically.
One of her many. Thank God writers today have not made that terribly anymore.
Thank you, J. Michael Straczynski, because that's
right. Not since not counting her getting shot by the Kingpin's assassin in the Civil War storyline, but not since she came back from the dead or was never really killed to begin with. Has she had a medical issue?
And as somebody whose first issue was 2 weeks after Amazing Spider-Man 400 after she died, no wonder I don't like Aunt May. So Peter doesn't react well. He basically is thinks again. He thought he was losing it beforehand, but now he's mad. Ned Leeds goes and helps him, tells him this is Gwen, who happens to have the exact same fingerprints as the dead Gwen. They check the grave. Her body's still in the grave, so there's 2 Gwens running around. Jackal shows up eventually and reveals himself to be Professor Warren himself. The Battle of Shea Stadium occurs. This is the first canonical appearance of Ben Reilly. Samples were given to Warren by Gwen and Peter for a class project. Anthony Serba was killed after he accidentally creates the original clones per Warren's direction because they cloned a frog successfully, and then he's like, well, here, these are of a rat, and he's like, dude, they're human, and then he's like, no, I'm just going to choke you out and kill you. But in his brain, it wasn't Miles that killed Anthony Serba, it was the Jackal. His mind broke. So Anthony, of course, I'm not going to talk. I don't want to talk about the retcon until later. There was a retcon that Dan Slott wrote recently, but it's wrong. So in my headcanon, I just consider it wrong. Warren is presumed dead at this point because at the end of the Battle of Shea Stadium, he ends up having a moment of clarity and a moment of sanity. Ends up saving Ned Leeds, who was trapped, was convinced by the Gwen clone because reasons. And so this all occurred. ASM 149 was actually the end of Jerry Conway's Amazing Spider-Man run. Cover date of October 1975, but the actual release date, because cover dates and release dates are always different, was actually on July 8th of 1975. So then we cut to briefly the first Carrion. His first appearance was in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man, cover dated of December of 1978. So there was the 2 issues of after that with the Mass Marauder story, and it kind of bleeds into issue 28 where he begins his assault on Peter's life. Occurs over 3 issues as the Carrion Saga, where he claims to be the first clone of Miles Warren. This is the cover dated June 1979, released on March 27th of that year. So then we get to Annual 8. Now, I do want to note for listeners of this podcast that Annual 8 was actually released on July 8th of 1988. The cover date was only for the year of 1988 and would have been cover dated November of 80. What?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, cover dated November of 88 and was released 1 week after Spectacular 143 and 3 weeks before 144. So that's when it was released, although it takes place shortly before 149. So even though it's weird on when it was released. Obviously, the Evolutionary War was an 11-part story. The first time that Marvel had done a crossover amongst the annuals.
Okay, so before the Atlantis attacks.
Yes, Atlantis Attacks was the following year in 89. So this was the first time that they experimented with doing one big story over the annuals. So, but it wasn't just contained to Spider-Man. It was contained to X-Factor, The Punisher, Silver Surfer, New Mutants, Fantastic Four, X-Men, West Coast Avengers, and then Amazing Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and Spectacular Spider-Man.
And a what if.
Yes, there was a what if that was published afterwards. Also, the Avengers annual too.
Hey, so, Leo, hear an echo, by the way.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, you are giving us an echo, Chris.
You are too.
Okay, I think it's coming from you. So you want to hop on?
Sure.
Let me. I'm using a soundboard, so sometimes that may affect it too. So.
Let's see. I muted Chris, and the echo went away.
And from the fact I had Facebook up.
Ah.
No, it's still there.
That's weird. Okay.
Yeah,
Is it there now?
Yeah, let me mute Chris. Oh, we still got it. Hold on.
Is it me?
Shouldn't be me because I was muted.
Testing 1, 2.
Odd.
Hello?
Everybody sounds good on my end, so that's why I'm confused.
Yeah.
But I'm still hearing the echo.
Yeah, hold on. We'll figure this out in a second. Okay, testing. Okay, Zach, say something.
Testing 1,
We're
2.
echoing now, Leo, as well.
Yeah, for some reason it's coming from you, Zach. I don't know why.
Okay, let me. I know what it is. It's
Okay.
my. Let me leave the studio and come back.
Sound
Okay.
good? Okay, testing. Yep. I think it went away. Did it go away for you, Chris?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Robert says we're good. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah,
Zach,
let's make sure we edit all this out so we go right back into Zach's explanation. Thankfully, again, we're not covering too much of this annual because there's a lot of boring crap. And just being like, the clone, oh, Gwen, oh, she's not real. She's like this thing. And Mary Jane's like, how often are you going to keep mentioning your your hot dead ex-girlfriend. I'm right here.
Okay, so I have Spectacular Annual number 8 up, and I'll bring up what was the other issue you wanted me to bring up?
Spectacular Spider-Man number 149.
149.
There'll be some double issues coming up soon with Spectacular because I completely forgot the Lobo storyline crosses over into Web of Spider-Man.
Okay.
And then like 9 episodes, Acts of Vengeance. Oh my god. That's like every fucking Spider-Man book except for one title, except for one issue where he fights Graviton. Is an Acts of Vengeance issue, but it's not part of the Cosmic Spider-Man storyline.
Jason said, "What up from Dallas, Texas?" Hey, Jason. Zach's going to be joining us back in a second, and then we'll get right back into the Clone Wars saga. And the first one, right, Chris?
No.
No.
This is actually technically the third Clone Saga storyline before they got to the Clone Saga proper in the 90s.
Jeez. Amy says, what happened to the audio? What happened is we were getting an echo from Zach, so he hopped out and hopping back in.
So there was the Clone Saga that originally caused all this, starting with technically Amazing Spider-Man number 129, where the Jackal hires a hitman called the Punisher to kill Spider-Man. Because he's like, Spider-Man killed Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy. You should kill him. He's a criminal. Oh, okay, sure. And then the Punisher's like, wait a minute. Did I just get hired for a job by a guy in a goblin costume that's like jumping around like a little midget? Gee, I'm the Punisher and like this Vietnam War veteran former cop. I should know that something doesn't seem right with me. By the way, the Punisher's the stupidest fucking character in the comic books that he couldn't do his own research to go, Spider-Man saves a lot of people, but he supposedly killed like this rich billionaire and this blonde chick. But I'm being hired to kill Spider-Man by a guy in a goblin costume calling himself the Jackal, even though a jackal doesn't look like a green short midget.
Yes. Yes.
You're the dumbest fucking character, Frank Castle. No wonder your family was wiped out in front of you.
In defense of Frank, let's just say that it was the 70s and like this was also being written by a 22-year-old Jerry Conway, okay? Let's be real.
I will take it out on Jerry Conway if he ever comes on the show, but respectfully with all like his, like, all right, Jerry, let's break down the Punisher a little bit in the beginning. Okay, let's go back to Spider-Man Annual because we don't want to get too segued off.
Yes. So now we get to there. Okay. So if you want to read this, you could always get the original Clone Saga trade. It is available on Amazon, but I think it's out of print right now. So just so everybody knows, you can get this. You can also read this on Marvel Unlimited if you have that. Or if you like to do classic stuff, you can read a lot of the original Clone Saga and the Clone Genesis trade from the 1990s. So, but this issue is not in that Clone Genesis trade. They only just have the 90s stuff.
Right. And besides, they could really just cut out all the Evolutionary War crap and just keep in like the fun part.
So I don't know this for sure. I hadn't had a chance to research it fully, but I think this is Mark Bagley's first Spider-Man work was on this annual. So Spectacular Annual, like I mentioned before, was released July 8th of 88. The main story is called Return to Sender. We open with Peter interacting with a cat, and then he gets then the cat jumps away and he gets blasted. So these two goons are hunting somebody, and it turns out the girl that they're hunting is the Gwen clone, because at the end of the original Clone Saga, after everything was said and done, the Gwen clone was allowed to exit stage left. Basically, she was allowed to vanish in the ether. And I'll explain a little bit why that original story happened, because it relates to why this issue even exists. So, of course, Gwen, she's kind of confused. She's trying to look for Peter. Peter's trying to deal with these two crazy guys, and they end up vanishing. So Peter swings and takes off. that leads us to the first of a couple of different interludes, because the interludes basically have everything to do with the Evolutionary War. So if you've never heard of the High Evolutionary, congratulations, you're a blessed person, because the High Evolutionary is basically this guy that he's an Avengers villain that wanted to help with humanity and wants to help them evolve. And there's a whole big long explanation. I also want to point out that this is part 10 of part 11 of the Evolutionary War. So needless to say, he's trying to replicate the human race. We then cut to Peter back at his apartment, going through one of his drawers and finding a book. And Mary Jane has showed up, and she's at this point Peter and Mary Jane are married, despite what Joe Quesada might want you to think. So Mary Jane Peter's like got the book open, and she goes, "You looks like you've seen a ghost." And sure enough, he has the photo album of Gwen and Peter, and he's kind of reminiscing. And so Peter is very torn up about seeing the Gwen clone. Like, he thought he had addressed his feelings. But then we cut to the other interlude, which is all about the Evolutionary War. Basically, High Evolutionary comes and recruits a bunch of kids. That's the end of the interlude. Like, I'm speeding through that because that's really superfluous. So Mary Jane, she's a little upset. Like, she kind of always compared herself to Gwen. And so he's like, and Peter's like, dude, I'm in love with you. I'm married to you. You're the one I love. Well, then the doorbell rings. Peter is dressed in his robe. He's got his Spider-Man costume on. Gwen leaps into his arms and sees the spider symbol on his chest because he's still got the Spider-Man costume. And she freaks out. Now, a little bit of context. Before Gwen Stacy, despite what Dan Slott and J. Michael Straczynski might think and try to tell you, Gwen was terrified of Spider-Man. Also, she was bitterly angry at Spider-Man for the death of her father, for obvious reasons. So Peter, of course, after Gwen freaks out, he puts on his costume and swings off into the night. She ends up running in front of a truck. Peter saves her and was like, dude, we need to talk. And he's like, Captain Stacy died saving a kid from a falling building. He didn't cause it. Basically, the only cause that he had was that he fired some specialized webbing on Doc Ock's tentacles, who hit half of a chimney on a kid. That's exactly what happened. But he's trying to explain this when, of course, he gets zapped and Gwen Stacy's being kidnapped by this giant mecha. So Peter then jumps to the mecha just as he's about to take off when he shows up at this giant science place where Gwen is in the clutches of the mecha. Peter is freaking out, and all of a sudden, High Evolutionary's goons are going to attack him, and then she is put in into this big giant piece of machinery because Herbert, that's the name of High Evolutionary, wants to study her. So Peter is fighting when all of a sudden these kids show up these new gods show up out of nowhere. They're fighting alongside because they've seen Daydreamer has seen this battle and seen these people, and she's trying to prevent it from stopping. So High Evolutionary is not interested in this. Meanwhile, Peter is fighting the Gwen versus being real or a memory. So he's trying to save Gwen. It looks like High Evolutionary is starting to get the upper hand when Peter kind of joins the fray and starts fighting. Herbert is still looking at the analysis. He doesn't look happy. He looks angry. So the fight continues with the new gods, and eventually Daydreamer attacks one of the other minions of High Evolutionary, the mecha, still fighting with Peter Parker. We're kind of intersplicing back and forth between this and the overall New God story. Meanwhile, Peter finally gets
the Young Gods. The New Gods are DC Comics.
Oh yeah, my bad. Young Gods. I keep calling them New Gods because I keep confusing them. Thank you for correcting me, Chris. So the Young Gods, they're getting the upper hand. Peter finally gets the upper hand on the mecha, and then he saves Gwen. So Peter's spider sense starts going off, and he's like, "You're not the Gwen I knew. I'm in love with someone else," because he's trying to say, he doesn't want to say Mary Jane, even though he's around a bunch of people that wouldn't care about his secret identity. So
Right. By the way, do you also notice Carter kind of looks like, speaking of DC, Carter reminds me of Jericho of Teen Titans.
Yes, very much so. So
I don't even know who Carter is. I don't know who any of these young characters are. They all just, let's just face it. If you think the Eternals coming out is going to be the most obscure thing Marvel's put on the big screen, if they ever did the Young Gods, that would be the next.
Yes. Or what's going to happen is they'll show up at the end of the Eternals movie. So, needless to say, High Note sends everybody home, including the Gwen, except for Peter and Gwen. So the High Evolutionary shows up and he starts explaining the reality of the situation. His gatherers learned of and I'm quoting here. His gatherers learned of her existence and origin from the files of her creator, Professor Miles Warren. And so he was asking himself the question of how could a mere university biology professor accomplish a technical miracle such as the nearly instantaneous cloning, which is a good question, but it's comics. So that's the answer to the question. But anyway, so this is what is revealed to have happened. He kidnapped a poor young other college student, injected her with a virus that would transform her on the cellular level, making her think, and through hypnosis made her think that she was actually Gwen Stacy. So Gwen's starting to ask questions, and then Herbert, because Herbert's a jerk, he decides to just, whisk him off. So Dreamweaver, shows back up and kind of restores her mind, and that's really the end of the issue. And Peter shows up to Mary Jane, says, Gwen's gone. She's been gone for a long time. But that he loved her more than he ever loved Gwen. And so that is the end of the issue. So
right. And that's also a great little piece that, again, who's the writer of this issue?
This one was Jerry Conway. Jerry Conway.
Didn't he write the one where basically after he dumps Ben's supposedly dead body into the smokestack and throws the papers away of Kurt Connors, which became one of the biggest plot lines of the Clone Saga, of he never looked at the papers, he could have been the clone. He goes back to the apartment where Mary Jane's waiting for him after the debacle with the Gwen clone, and she's like, Tiger, is everything okay? And he's like, let me show you how everything's okay. And we believe that moment when he shuts the door is the moment him and MJ have sex for the first time.
Yes.
And also, MJ is Peter's first.
Yes.
Because it's revealed by J. Michael Straczynski later on that him and Gwen never had sex.
Right.
Gwen Stacy decided to get busy with Norman Osborn.
Why? Why do you got to bring that up?
Because it's still in continuity, damn it.
Yeah. That's one of those things I'm hoping that Nick Spencer fixes, because he's been doing a lot of that lately. He's been fixing everybody else's messes. But no, that part did occur. Now, how Peter realized that he was not the clone was actually in ASM 150. He starts thinking about Mary Jane and doesn't think about Gwen, and surmises that he wouldn't be thinking about Mary Jane if he was the clone. Right. And that was not written by Jerry Conway. That was written, and I'm double checking right now, I think that was written by Archie Goodwin. And this was the only issue he wrote, was 150. Eventually, he gets thrown. Ben gets thrown down the smokestack in 151, and that is the last we're supposed to see of the clones. So that leads to the issue at hand, the Sal Bucema issue. Annual 8 leads to this, because the question becomes, what about Carrion? If Gwen Stacy wasn't a clone, what about Carrion? And so that is where we pick this issue up. Now, again, if you want to be a masochist like myself and you want to read this is all on the original Clone Saga trade, including this story. So the issue opens with Peter thinking about, kind of lost in thought, thinking about what's been going on the last few months with the question of Gwen's validity. We then get introduced, or for readers, for me, I get introduced for the first time to Malcolm McBride. And needless to say, Malcolm is kind of a jerk to Peter, and Peter's kind of a jerk right back to him. So Peter then goes to Dr. Swan, who is.
Wait a minute, we're jumping into 149.
Oh yeah. Did you want to talk about more about the annual? I'm sorry.
There's a couple things we didn't get to.
Sure. My bad.
I wanted to point out that the cover of annual number 8, and then I had the whole plot breakdown of 149.
Oh, okay, cool. So I'll let you do that.
There's a way I like to do this. The cover to annual issue number 8, by the way, is by Sal Bucema, who's the regular artist on the Spectacular book.
Yes, he is.
And which is funny, by the way, he's the artist on the book all the way unstopping until the Typhoid Mary 2-parter.
Yeah, he had like a huge continuous run, and like other than a couple of fill-ins, he pretty much is the if there is an artist that defines a book, I would say you can't really say that about Amazing, but about the satellite titles, Buscema's art really defines Spectacular. I would argue Alex Savick his artwork defines Web. He's like the definitive artist of Web of Spider-Man, but definitely Sal is the Spectacular guy.
I would love to have Sal on this podcast as much as Jerry Conway. So very much. JMD Mateus has said he'll come back on when we finally get around to his run, because he came on Radio of Horror. But I would love to have Sal on the show.
I will tell you this. I know some contacts. I will reach out and I will try to help coordinate.
I appreciate that. I tried it with JM, and he's like, unfortunately, I haven't been in contact with Sal in a number of years.
Well, I know I'm not saying I'm personal friends with Ron, but I'm buddy with Ron friends, and that's pretty much his exclusive inker.
Oh, gotcha.
So Sal is more or less retired, but he'll come on and ink anything that Ron draws, basically.
Oh, okay, cool.
They're doing a Sit Comics, I think is the name of the online bookstore. They have a comic, and the name escapes me, but it's sitcomics.com, and Sal is still inking Ron's work. So, like I say, he's more or less retired, but he's ever since Spider-Girl, he's basically become Ron's personal inker.
Excellent.
Cool. So anyway, that's I'll let you get to the do you want to give thoughts on the annual?
I don't have any thoughts other than it wrapped up like her kept appearing like throughout like the book, and the whole thing with she is what's her
Joyce
real name?
You'll learn in this issue. It's Joyce Delaney.
Okay, and then in Web of Spider-Man 125 is when they kind of retcon that back to being the Gwen Stacy clone, right?
That is the first time we see the Gwen clone. The official retcon explaining the High Evolutionary stuff and his connection to Miles actually doesn't occur until Scarlet Spider Unlimited #1.
Right, definitely. I wonder when they'll bring the High Evolutionary into the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
God, I hope not.
We got a taste of it with bovine milk or something on WandaVision.
Yes, I heard about that, and I'm like, no, why? The only reason the bovine part works is that's the explanation for the animal woman hybrid that took care of Pietro.
The cow woman.
The cow woman, yeah, that takes care
which is not a derogatory term because she's fat or something. No, she's a cow who's a woman.
She's a cow woman humanoid. That's the best way of describing it. They're called the Andamen. And if you're a cartoon fan of Spider-Man, you can always watch Spider-Man Unlimited if you really want to. But
that's not really the High Evolutionary. That was like some weird thing they did.
Well, it's there. He's named the High Evolutionary, but he doesn't look anything like the High Evolutionary.
Right, and he's. I think the only time he ever looks like the High Evolutionary is the X-Men '90s cartoon where Magneto learns the truth about Pietro and Wanda.
Yep.
So, okay, back to this real quick. Okay, so Spectacular Spider-Man 149, continuing our run of our coverage of Sal's excellent artistry on the book, was published in April of 1989 with editor-in-chief Tom DeFalco and cover artist and penciler inker Sal, written by Jerry and colorist Bob Sharon, letterer Rick Parker, and editor Jim Scallarip. the issue opens up. What about Carry On with a little bit of taste of the Lobo Brother wolves attacking the Kingpin's pickup money, and the Arrangers informed that the Lobo brothers are coming for the Fat Man.
Yes.
Peter Parker is in class thinking about the events of the High Evolutionary War, which happened a few months just before the events of Inferno, realizing that if Warren was a simple college professor who went nuts because he wanted to bang his student and cloned her so he could bang her, he couldn't possibly have done that because he's just a college professor. It doesn't make any sense. Little did we know later on it's all the machinations of Norman Osborn.
And he learned the art of cloning through the High Evolutionary, but we don't learn that until much later.
Correct.
Yeah.
Peter leaves class and runs into a classmate who has a big stink on for Parker, and that becomes a big problem later on. Malcolm McBride, who I think they used, by the way, little side note before we get back to the plot synopsis, I think they used a little bit of this for the Morbius character on the 90s Spider-Man cartoon.
Yes.
Anyway, getting back to this. Replaying over the events of the Clone Saga, which Zach has covered, all the while, unbeknownst to him, Malcolm McBride, a college classmate, has discovered the carry-on virus, haven't previously mentioned, and it comes to life, infecting him in the eyeballs. MJ is worried Peter is not dealing with the death of the Gwen's clone, and she's like, I'm a living person. I'm right here. By the way, I want to point out that Peter and Cyclops have a lot in common. Both MJ and Emma Frost had this issue with, like, dead lover and constantly being obsessed with her. When you have the 10 out of 10 hottie waiting for you in bed.
It happens, allegedly.
Right. Kat Cushing is back in the Bugle and wishes Gloria would understand what is happening in her life, as her new boy toy happens to be a fucking werewolf. Over on the trial of Robbie Robertson, the evidence stacked against Robbie is not looking very good, and we'll get more into that in the next issue. Peter is attacked by Carry-On, who does not seem to remember they have fought before back in the Spectacular Spider-Man issues that Zach has mentioned, but knows Peter is Spider-Man because he thinks he is the clone of Miles Warren, until they fight in the graveyard, and Carrion is shocked to learn he is not the clone of Miles Warren. He is somebody else, and Peter is able to use that to get the upper hand and defeats him and says, I will call the vault, I thought it was the raft, to take Carrion away. He says his goodbyes to Gwen and decides to go home to his beautiful wife.
The vault was first. The raft comes later.
Right, and Carrion would be seen again with the return of another Spider-Man villain coming up in, I think, after the events of the Cosmic Spidey.
Yeah, 162 is what it does in the original Clone Trade. So
my first exposure to this was a fleeting memory of seeing this cover, and then when I was knee deep in the Clone Saga around the Clonage Omega crossover event, I was like, wait a minute, wasn't there like a whole Clone Saga happened prior to this? I'm aware of the issues I don't have access to in the Amazing 149. I think it's funny, by the way, that the Spectacular 149 and the Amazing 149 are both clone issues.
Yeah, it is very symmetrical in that way.
And I went to my local comic book store, and they had the annual number 8 and the Spectacular 149, and I gobbled them down. I was so happy that they had these back issues. Because every and all Clone Saga back issue up to the colossal, messed up continuity reveal that Peter was the clone all along, were incredibly hard to find. But they had these 2 issues for dirt cheap prices, and I bought them and gobbled them up because I was so entrenched in like, what about all these other things that have happened in Spider-Man? How does that make sense?
Yeah, Vinkman, the guy in the comments, actually was the one that sent me this Clone Genesis trade, and they actually published this because of all the confusion. And in there is a whole forward by Jerry Conway.
Right. Now, when Peter's in class, by the way, and this woman Anna Marie, this is not Anna Marie, the midget that Dr. Octopus would fall in love one day, right?
Yeah, that's an entirely different person. No.
Okay.
Yeah. We don't see. So I also want to give context for those that don't know. During this period of time, Conway was also writing Web. And so sometimes if you're not reading Web and Spectacular, they'll reference each other back and forth. I do love that the caption box telling everybody to go read the annual is actually wrongly numbered. It says annual 7, but it's actually annual 8.
Yeah.
That always made me chuckle. I'm like, you guys just published this like 3 months ago, or like 4 months ago. So yeah, listen. First things first. I love Sal Bucema's art. It's just phenomenal. The slice of life stuff, the way that you don't even need the words on the page, and you can see that Peter's troubled. He's got this troubled look on his face. You can see that Malcolm McBride doesn't like Peter from the scowl he has on his face. The facial expressions that he's able to emote as an artist on the page are incredibly good. This issue is somewhat, for Clone fans, it's kind of the bane of everybody's existence, and it's the reason that they wrote the Unlimited issue of Scarlet Spider, because bringing in the Gwen Stacy clone, were like, when they brought in the Jackal, that wasn't the original plan. They brought in the Jackal because the sales were so hot on Power and Responsibility, which will be the last episode of the show, as Chris said.
No, we're not doing Power and Responsibility. We're ending it with you.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Your Rage of the Desperate Man, I think, was
right. It's the Scorpion issue where he's like, it's that issue.
So, because it came out literally the week before Web of 118. So, like, this one was kind of Jerry Conway's way of retconning things, because he was a little embarrassed by the clone story. And the reason why is because I think he probably looked back on it and went, well, that's ridiculous. But the whole reason he even wrote the Gwen Stacy clone story was because he originally pitched the death of Gwen Stacy, or actually, excuse me, he gets the writing job for Amazing, and he's doing a plot back and forth between him and John Romita. And he's like, well, what if we kill somebody off, that's going to shake things up on the title. And so John Romita was the one that sat there and said, well, why don't we kill Gwen? Jerry thought that was a great idea. They both go to Stan. Stan thinks, oh, that's a great idea. This has never been done before, where the love interest has been killed because of something that happens with the hero. This will be a really great story.
By the way, what is it with writers named Jerry wanting to kill off popular characters? Because it was Jerry Ordway's idea to kill off Superman. That was always his idea. Every time they had the writers meeting, that everybody has always said, "Yeah, no, it was Jerry Ordway's idea to kill Superman."
Yeah. There's a great podcaster named Mike Bailey that does like Superman podcasts, and
I am very familiar with him. He has been on the show to talk about the horrors of Superman and the horrors of Batman.
Yes. So
in fact, I think he was like incredibly jealous when I was like, by the way, Mark Carlin came on my show. He's like, how the hell did you get Mike Carlin on your show? He's impossible to get a hold of. I was like, I don't know. I reached out to DC. I was like, can I have Mike Carlin on? And they're like, for what? This, that, and the other thing, and we'll promote that stupid DVD that you're putting out this month. And they're like, sure.
See, Mike, you just got to talk to DC Direct,
Well, apparently I asked Mike, how the hell did I get you on the show afterwards? Because he's like, I can't do any more interviews. And he's like, I think it was the right time at the right place, Chris. And like constantly my supervisor and my boss are changing, whatever, or the PR person is changing.
Oh, yeah.
You nailed the one person who was just like, absolutely. And then everyone else you've talked to is like, no.
So... yeah,
he's always going to be in huge demand next year, because you know what next year is? It's the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Trust me,
yeah.
I am gleefully like counting the days down when we get to 2024, and I'm like,
right,
30th anniversary of the Clone Saga.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to the issue. So, this. What I find really weird is like, okay, so this secret laboratory beneath ESU where Spider-Man had his climactic battle with the Masked Marauder and Carrion from years ago in the 70s probably took place, a couple years ago in Marvel continuity time?
It's see, time is so wonky because sliding time scale, timey-wimey things.
Right, and did you pick up the Marvels #1?
I have not yet.
Okay, Leo, did you buy the Marvels #1?
Is it coming out this week?
Nope, came out 2 weeks ago.
No.
Okay, The Marvels is written by Kurt Busiek, and it's kind of like a Marvel team up story, where every issue they're gonna have like different characters teaming up to do something and introducing new characters. And in it, they do 2 flashbacks. One of which says that like Reed and Ben were in the army back during the Asian War of some made up country because they can't use the Vietnam War anymore like they did before.
Yep.
17 years ago when that book was published, which was like a couple weeks ago. So that means Ben and Reed were normal people 17 years ago.
Yep.
Okay.
It means the Marvel Universe happened after 9/11 for those
Right.
that are keeping score at home.
Flash Thompson is in the army 12 years ago. Because Daredevil is at a USO show at this never-ending Asian war, I'm using quotations, you can't see me, that they made up. Because if you read the official history of the Marvel Universe told by Galactus and Franklin Richards, they can't keep using the Vietnam War anymore. So Punisher is the vet of some Asian war of some kind by Shukai or something. It's some made-up country, I think.
Oh, my goodness.
Anyway, so Flash is in the USO show watching the Daredevil thing, and he's like, he's no Spider-Man, because he's the hardcore Spider-Man fan.
Right.
So that means Spider-Man appeared like 13 years ago, and the Fantastic Four had to have been on the scene at least a year or two before Spider-Man did.
Yeah.
So, and it's always been like said that like the Fantastic Four were around at least a year before Spider-Man showed up, which is in continuity somewhat,
Yeah, because like the first like 10 years.
The most recent, by the way, the most recent issues of Fantastic Four, Dan Slott has said the Fantastic Four have been around for 15 years.
Yeah, so like the first few years of Marvel continuity were like took place in literal months,
Right.
And then starting in the 80s, the sliding time scale started to like happen, and Mark Grunwald was in charge of like making sure everything fit. So what's really funny is that you're reading these issues and you're covering these issues like with the Robbie Robinson trial and Tombstone, and it's incredibly relevant because if you're reading Amazing Spider-Man right now, literally the storyline that's going on in Amazing Spider-Man has Tombstone's daughter and Robbie's son dating.
Yes, so we brought that up multiple times. And it's going to be even funnier when we get to, it just happened in King in Black, but the Captain Universe power showed up in King in Black to embody Eddie Brock.
Yeah.
And in about 9 episodes of this podcast, roughly, we will get to the Spider-Man Captain Universe storyline.
Oh, dude, that's such a good story. The
fact that they've retconned that, okay, so there's 2 ancient gods, Null and Captain Universe, and they're like the light and the dark. And this is all, Johnny Cates is writing until the next person comes around to write Venom, and he's just like, you know what Venom's going to do? Venom's going to become a cannibal now, and he's going to like gouge out people's brains and eat them. We're going to finally do that.
Listen.
Venom being a hero, Venom's going to be a villain again, and I'm going to be like, thank you.
Chris, just to butt in here for a second, we have 6 minutes.
Okay, getting through the issue real quick, we are a bit of a time with this. I think the fight between Carrion and Spider-Man is fantastic with the way Sal draws it, the whooshing lines and everything. Sal was a really good expert at the whooshing line stuff.
Yeah, there's just a dynamic element to his artwork. Some of that I think is the Romita influence. Some of that is also his brother's influence.
Right, definitely.
So yeah, nobody draws a man getting smacked across the room better than Sal Bucema.
The other thing I want to point out is on the gravestone, and this is on the website, the MarvelFandom.com. They say that Miles Warren was 48 years old when he died at the hands of Spider-Man. I guess I believe that. I mean, the fact that he's like, ogling an 18-year-old girl in class does make for that like the age difference to be that weirdness of it all.
Oh yeah, he when you first see him like in the Romita run, because he started appearing more and more once Romita became the artist.
Right.
Because he doesn't show up until 39. He escorts them on their first date, and he looks like a Leave It to Beaver dad with a stash.
Right.
Like he looks very much like the 50s, and then you get to the 70s, and he's looking more and more like a 70s professor. But yeah, no, this I do want to address the Carrion aspect because this does get solved because the Carrion thing kind of was lingering out there. There was a one shot that was written by Roger Stern after the Clone Saga was published called Dead Man's Hand, and there was a third Carrion. So Malcolm McBride's the second Carrion, then you had the original Carrion. It confirms that the original Carrion was in fact a clone. So it retcons this issue's things. The diary that Peter ends up obtaining in this issue actually was Herbert Landon. Herbert Evolutionary altering the journals of Miles Warren to wipe out him working with Miles Warren.
Right. By the way, just for anyone's listening, if you're wondering where the Gwen clone went after the 90s Clone Saga, she popped back up in the Spider Island storyline and was swiftly killed off by the Spider Queen character, old Captain America villain from World War II. And
also, that's when we first got the appearance of. This is also the establishment of a Carrion being a Carrion virus, which is a plot point in Clone Saga. But yes, she was killed during that between the Queen and the never before seen Carrion Gwen clone hybrid that showed up.
Right.
It was the Deadly Foes of Spider-Man one shot during Spider Island.
It gets more confusing with Spider Island because another the Miles Warren returns after he was killed in Spider Clonage Omega, whatever it was called. The Clone Omega storyline, the Maximum Clonage, that's what it was. Yeah. And we never saw him again until Spider Island. And we're like, what the hell?
Well, he randomly appeared in like a 3-issue mini of Spider-Man the Punisher. Like there was a Spider-Man Punisher 3-issue mini. But other than that was his only appearance. And then he gets... And allegedly, according to Dan Slott's Twitter, that was actually Ben Reilly as the Jackal, which... Don't get me started because I will rage for another hour.
No, we're not going to go down that path of what happened to Ben Reilly eventually. But this fight with Carrion, I thought was amazing. And again, this is the testament of why I like the Spectacular book so much, just because Carrion looks like such a horrific character. And when we see him return, he's going to team up with another horrific character. And then later on, another group of horrific characters, which we will get to eventually, which I think was just covered recently on the web Spider-Man. What's the main Spider-Man show on the network you do?
Well, we do the Splash.
No, Zach.
I think they covered it on Crawl Space, but I'm not.
They covered Maximum Carnage.
Yeah, I haven't been on Crawl Space since May of last year, but yeah, I'd left to go do my own thing.
Gotcha.
But yeah, no, J.R. Fettinger used to have a website called Spidey Kicks Butt. You can find all his articles on the Crawl Space. Crawl Space is a great Spider-Man site. Them and Spider-Fan, I think, between those two, cover pretty much anything and everything you could possibly want to know about Spidey in the comics.
And then the next issue is a Virgin's Reach for Robbie Robinson. Be here for Guilty, which honestly, when we get to the Robbie Tombstone trial in the next issue, and then Robbie in jail, and Tombstone and Robbie's escape or whatever, with what's happening currently right now in Spider-Man, it's like, what was the point of all this? Because years later, they're both fine. Robbie's running the Bugle. Tombstone's still free, not in jail for the rest of his life, or not in the electric chair. It's because New York has the death penalty. It's like, what is the point of all this if you're not going to keep the freaking character in prison or whatever? Tombstone's not that interesting of a character that you couldn't have left him in prison up till now.
Listen, my favorite iteration of Tombstone, truthfully, is the Spectacular Spider-Man podcast or Spider-Man show, where they basically made him the Kingpin.
Right, where he was voiced by Ken Foree. No, he's voiced. Yeah. No, who is he voiced by?
Oh, the guy that voiced Goliath.
Yeah. Oh, god damn it. The actor who played Spawn.
Yes, I I see him in my brain, and we're about to do a Gargoyles podcast on our network. So
oh my god, yeah. So I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Everyone, that's the 2 issues of the Clone Saga we're ever going to cover for now on this podcast.
You can bring me on for other stuff. I'm down.
Well, we'll have to have you back on for the Cosmic Spider-Man storyline. Will be broken up a lot because there's so many parts to it.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
So there will be 2 issues. It will be, plot synopsis and then going into it page by page, but it'll be very detailed, but it'll be, heavily broken up. There's no show next week, people, but in 2 weeks we'll be back for the 150th issue, the trial of Joe Robertson, and Tombstone and Guilty and everything that happens in that. But next week on the Dorkening Network, Splash Pages, we have Mark Grunwald's widow coming on the show to talk about John Walker and Mark Grunwald's history of being a writer for Marvel.
I applaud you for getting that interview. Mark Grunwald is such a profound influence of 80s and 90s Marvel. And
so sweet. She's such a nice person. I mean, I've really gotten to know Catherine, and she's helping me on a project that I'm keeping very on the down low, but I think I've talked to you about in private chat.
Yeah. And I'm excited to see that. And to me, Grunwald is one of a lot of the influences you're seeing in the MCU. Grunwald had a hand in.
Right. And Mike Carlin too, by the way.
Yeah. Mike Carlin.
Mike Carlin was Grunwald was Mike Carlin's boss, by the way, at Marvel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Grunwald. Yeah. So
sorry to cut us, but if I don't start the other show, I'm going to lose the link.
Okay.
Yep. So Zach, where do you like people interacting with you on social media?
Okay, so you can find me if you're watching this live. You see at Spidey Dude Radio. That's my Twitter handle. At Spidey Dude Network is my Facebook page for Spidey-Dude.com. You can find all of our shows on Spidey-Dude, and you can find all our streams. We have our YouTube page for our podcast network. I have 2 podcasts that I do every month right now. We got Make Mine Mayday, which is our Spider-Girl podcast. And then we have Spidey Dude Experience, where I'm covering every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man as they come out. So I'm covering so I'll actually be going live tomorrow for my show covering that. So if you want to like and subscribe, find us on YouTube there. We're not quite to the 100 yet. So on the YouTube list, we're still a young YouTube page. But like I say, you can also, if you want to hear more of me talking about clones and stuff like this, you can find at Clone Saga Chronicles podcast. That is available on all your favorite podcasting catchers. So yeah, those are the 3.
Awesome. And we got your links in the show notes. Real quick, Chris, what about you?
You can find me over on Radio of Horror, and Goth Girl Horror has a new episode out later this week. That is the Hack/Slash podcast I do with Charcy. And you can also, if you wish to, go over to Vlada, A Dracula Tale, and support the upcoming audiobook Kickstarter, which launches next Thursday, May 13th. Audiobook Kickstarter for Vlada, A Dracula Tale.
Sweet.
Means, and you'll find me actually in less than 30 seconds on the same page talking about Star Wars. And we'll catch you guys later.
Bye.
Thanks, Leo.
Thank you.
Bye, Zach. I'll talk to you on Facebook.